Cardiff Met, and has quite a big group up there of athletes from club through to GB international level. And James is also involved in a few social running initiatives as well. So I would say quite understands the whole spectrum of our sport. Obviously, James is a rich history as an athlete as well. So an athlete competed on the world stage for both Wales and Great Britain. So yeah, but brings him a wealth of experience there as well, and still an active competitor for his club, Cardiff AC. So just before I hand over to James, quickly, there's a few housekeeping rules. Like I said, you're all on mute. If you want to ask any questions and pose questions to James at the end, if you pop them in the questions drop down on your dashboard, and then we'll endeavour to get through as many questions as we can at the end. Okay, so without further ado, I will hand you over to Mr. James Thie.
Thank you very much, Liz. So welcome everybody. Another webinar. I never even knew what a webinar was until lockdown started. So yeah, delighted to be asked by Welsh Athletics to talk about the knowledge and the art of 10K training and racing. And for me, that's kind of, I like the art element of it. Being a coach, we're going to talk a lot about the kind of physiological kind of components, but there's also an art to it. There's an art to training, there's an art to coaching. And that's something that hopefully will come across through this presentation. So for me, obviously, Liz has just been through my background, so I won't go too much from that, other than obviously, you know, having experience of coaching from 400 meters up to 50K. And yeah, I'd like to think that I can get across some of my experience, but also having been a runner as well. Sometimes as a coach, that can be a good thing, but also it can be a little bit of a backstep as well. You can never escape your history and escape what you understand, and therefore my development as a coach since 2008, has been, you know, one that is not always easy, and it's one that I've constantly have to learn, because of the things that I learned, or things that I learned that work for me didn't always necessarily translate into my athletes. So this webinar, we're going to be looking obviously at the physical and kind of mental prep of 10K. We'll look at some examples of sessions and training, and explore kind of how that looked in preparation, and then what we all want from our athletes and what we want as athletes ourselves is executing that perfect race, if there is such thing as a perfect race. I put down my aims for today myself. You'll probably see my L&T, my learning and teaching coming out from my lecturing days in Cardiff Met at the moment. So for me, I want you to engage with this. I'm going to pitch it hopefully at a level that all of you can understand. We'll be touching upon some science, but I'm not going to dazzle you with science. As I said, we want to feel the event and get an art kind of element to it. But hopefully you come away with some discussions, you know, around key training, key racing, ingredients. That's something I'll keep coming back to, the ingredients of what it takes. But then I want you then to think about, you know, what you do as a coach or an athlete, why you do it, and then obviously, you know, how you can improve it. You're the converted. That's why you're here, because you're looking to hopefully upskill, looking to develop things. Some of the things I say, you probably will think, do you know what? That isn't the best way of doing it. And that's the beauty of coaching. That's why our sport doesn't have a load of robots coaching and a load of people just following training plans offline or online. It's about the interaction. It's about the understanding. So some of the stuff I say, take it, but don't always think that it's the absolute given. Challenge it why, and you've got a chance at the end for some questions. So challenge me why. I might hopefully have an answer for it, other than I'll have to bin it myself. Coaching is a you know, you're always learning lessons. As I said, my history as a middle distance runner. When I first went into coaching, it was the understanding, or my kind of ease of often giving people that I really understood those sessions and the volume, the amount that people ran a week. But when we really come to running 10 kilometers, and that's what this talk is about, there were times where, as a young coach, I didn't get the results that athletes should have been getting. There were inconsistent results. Some athletes had a lack of improvement, and then also athletes breaking down. Every coach's worst nightmare when athletes get injured. So for me, it was starting to look at, there wasn't enough volume at times. So the amount of running in the week, and therefore there wasn't enough running in actual sessions themselves. And as I said, too much running like a middle distance runner. There'd be time and places where some of that fits. The old classic training 3 hard sessions a week. you know, I did that and more when I was a runner myself. But when we start looking at how you're really going to maximize endurance runners from 5K upwards, then we really start to think about what are the components that go in there, and actually, yeah, what is best. And so I've challenged myself over the last few years. I'm not there yet. It's a constant learning, and through my learning, reading online resources. As I said earlier, you're here because you're the converted. You're here because hopefully you're looking at challenging yourselves, talking to great coaches. I've been really fortunate to have the likes of Chris Jones as mentors. Other people, I've been involved with Great Britain programs where you've been tapping into some of the best minds that are around, reading lots of things, you know, past and present athletes that will give you snippets and bits of advice. And then ultimately, you know, learning through trial and error. And I always say a big thank you to those athletes that have either been or are there now, because as a coach, you're still trying things. Nothing you do is ever going to have an absolute guaranteed success. And it is in the trust of the athletes that they give you in trying and actually being part of that process. So I always take a chance to say a big thank you to those athletes. So in thinking about ingredients and the components, the first part we'll look at now is you know, some of the fundamentals to running a good 10K. Now, I said I'm not going to kill you or bore you with science, but we have to look at science and things that are parameters, things that aren't going to change, and they're there that we must understand, or at least have an understanding to why they're important. And one of those is the kind of energy systems that's involved when we run. You probably all would have heard about aerobic, anaerobic. So aerobic is working with oxygen, anaerobic is working without, in really simple layman terms. Now, the classic model is on the left-hand side as I look at the screen, as you look at the screen. So that was the one where I probably ended up being a little bit more towards when I was coaching more with a middle distance hat on. And as you can see, the energy system there of a 10K runner is 90% aerobic, 10% anaerobic. Now, a lot of current info, and just I've underpinned it there with some work from Chapman, but it fits more towards the 97.3%. And that's something that I've learned through talking to people, reading, and seeing the proof in the pudding of runners, that's probably nearer the component of the breakdown. But as you can see, if you're coaching other event groups, it probably has a factor in the other events as well. You only have to look at 1500 meters in the right-hand column with the current model, where it's 70% 23, 94% for a 5K runner, 6%, as opposed to the lot higher values or lower if you look at the aerobic values on the left-hand side. Now, when I start looking at training and training principles, that's been a really, really big light bulb moment for me over the last few years. Why? Well, if you look at it in a really simple diagram of a pyramid, those that have seen many presentations, the pyramid's often used. So, you know, when we look at building a base, a pyramid is a good example of that. So our 10K from the current model, you've got your 97% aerobic, blue for giving it oxygen, red is that anaerobic part of training. So whatever we look at in terms of being good 10K runners, or obviously good 10K coaches, we're going to need athletes with big engines. We're going to need training programs that have big aerobic profiles to them. If we don't, then we're not catering to the needs of the athlete. And if we're not catering to the needs of the athlete, then obviously we're not going to get the best success out there. Now, I'm going to talk about and touch upon Dan Nash's presentations throughout today. He's done some for Welsh Athletics the last few weeks, so they're online. I recommend them for coaches. Go and read and watch them. Fantastic knowledge on the screen from Dan. But he put there that the training volume is the biggest performance indicator to endurance running, and we know from the slide before that's why. So, but you're going to ask me, what does that look like? What are the components of that 97%? Well, again, stealing Dan's zones, or the zones that we kind of use within Welsh Athletics, you've got your easy running. You've got your running that we start talking about heart rates. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about lactate levels. We're going to talk about them very, very briefly. But if you, again, want a little bit more info, Dan goes into a bit more information regarding those. And also Rob Hawkins does a great job about marathon training, about the lactic levels. You can see the progressions of Callum within his presentation. So another great production by Welsh Athletics. But in simple terms, when we start looking at zones 1 and 2, that's easy running. That's 70% of your heart rate, or under 70% of your heart rate. But what it means is that you can keep going 3 hours plus. And I've highlighted that in blue because when we start thinking about volume, you need to run at systems that you can keep going for a long time. You need to run at systems that don't always stress the body to an extreme, so you can do more of them. If we're in the volume game, then you've got to be in that aerobic, you've got to be in that blue area. Therefore, that's really, really important. So start to think about, whether you prescribe heart rates, whether athletes run to heart rate. Often a lot of the athletes I look after, or a lot of coaches, we talk about feel. And obviously, easy running, you should be able to chat all day. You know why? Because there's oxygen in your system and there's no issue with chatting whatsoever. So 1 and 2 are those under 70% heart rate. Then you've got the zone 3, which is your 70 to 85% heart rate. So some of those describe that as steady running. Often progression runs go on to that. And you've probably got about an hour to stay within that zone 3. But it's, again, you should be, a couple of conversations with people. It shouldn't be silent when you're running. You're definitely, again, working with oxygen. It's just a little bit harder. And again, 85%, you've still got a lot of wiggle room there to keep going. So another really important part, a component that, you can add volume on, but it's not overly stressing the system. And then zone 4, I've put this in gold for the actual writing itself. Why? And again, I was again, watch Dan's presentation, watch Rob's presentation, watch any endurance coach presentation. Tempo running is one of the bedrocks. It's one of the foundations that is going to be really important. Now, it complements the aerobic profile, but what you're trying to do in that tempo running, you're running with that heart rate of about 85 to 92%, but you're looking to improve your lactic turn point. So your ability to run for longer at a faster pace. So, offsetting fatigue. We all know that we've seen athletes go off too hard in races or in training at certain paces that they're not able to hold. Obviously, they overproduce, they've gone anaerobic, and they have to slow down. Now, obviously, if we can push up, and I like to think about it like it being either a roof or a ceiling, and what you're trying to do is if you can run as close to that ceiling as possible, you end up buffering it up, you end up pushing up the ceiling. And if you end up pushing up the ceiling, if we go back to our triangle of the kind of volume, if that base becomes bigger, if that top end becomes bigger, then you've got more ability to run faster, which ultimately we want to do. Every athlete wants to run faster for longer. Every coach wants every athlete to run faster for longer. So thinking of tempo running, and when we talk about 10K tempo running, you've got a different ways of playing with tempo. That is one of the beauties of tempo running. You can do it in blocks where you break it down into kind of longer reps. You can run it continuously. We have athletes running up to 10 miles. So, if a 10K is 6 miles, then it's another 4 miles on top of that in terms of volume. But what it is a slower pace than 10K. It's, often it's give or take slightly slower than the half marathon pace, or there or thereabouts half marathon pace, depending on the individual. But it is slower, 15 to 25 seconds per mile slower than 10K. But again, a bedrock, whether you're an 800-meter runner, 1500-meter runner, 50K ultra runner, tempo running is something that if you can look at investing in as a coach, as an athlete, you will get big return. But like anything, you're going up the zones, you're going up the stress. You can't be doing tempo running every day. At certain times, we might have some kind of block of tempos or a straight through tempo once a week or once every 10 days because you're touching base with it. But, and we'll touch again on this, you get the adaptation through recovery. So again, I wish it was as simple as doing a tempo every day and getting the benefit of a tempo every day, but it's not like that. You need to get your recovery to get that response. You want to adapt to the work that you put in. So they're the how-tos a little bit for developing that aerobic profile. We'll again touch upon this a little bit later in the presentation in where that might fit in the kind of periodization of it, a little bit more info on how it fits. But that is it in a nutshell. You're going to need some components of this, well, actually not some components, give or take around about 97% there or thereabouts. Now, the next part, now this is where you're thinking about, the 3%. Now, it's not as easy as just saying, right, 3% of your training is going to be anaerobic. But I think as coaches, it's a really nice way of thinking about the parts of training that can improve. Now, Obviously, if we build these big aerobic profiles, that's absolutely great, but we're always looking for improvement. And if I said to you that a runner could improve by 3% over a 35-minute 10K runner, that's inside a minute, it's improvement. Now, any coach would think, wow, that's worth an investment, worth a look. So we start thinking about the kind of anaerobic element to training. And often some 10K runners get a little bit scared by it. They think that speed or running super fast or shorter reps aren't for them. It's always about long. Well, we know it is to a degree, but if you're going to have the full spectrum of your training program and also maximize the energy systems, then that 3% or give or take where it fits can be a kind of really hidden kind of number. Now, again, the picture on the diagram, I've turned the triangle round on its head, almost to show where the little bit of the 3% could do one or two things. It can be the kind of pillar that holds up the aerobic base. Also, it can be the core that sits within it. Whatever your analogy that you want to think about the importance of it as a coach or an athlete. There's a picture of Tom Marshall there that I put it as his foot hitting the ground. Reason being, when we start thinking about that 3%, that we start thinking about the how-tos, and one of those is running economy. Now, you might have heard of running economy, you may not have heard of running economy, but if you're coaching endurance runners and you're coaching people that are doing the same thing over and over again, you're looking for them to run. Obviously, we want to raise that tempo bar, that lactate threshold, so we want them to run at a faster pace for longer. But ultimately, how economic are they at those paces? Now, if we can improve running economy, we can be more economic. That means the oxygen that we take on board, we're using it in a more effective way, but also it means that we're not fighting our own mechanics. A little bit of running economy is down to your biomechanics, and it is just how you're built, but you can develop it, and it's something that the best runners in the world have very, very good running economies. You only have to look at the likes of Eliud Kipchoge, to look at the likes of Kenenisa Bekele. Even Paula Radcliffe had one of the most phenomenal, forget the head, the legs and the turnover, her running economy was unrivaled. And there she ran a 2:15 marathon, no surprise there, based off her superb numbers at that running economy. So one of the things of running economy that can be improved is power. Power, where does power fit? Well, it fits in the anaerobic element. Dan put it as zone 6, very nicely sits there. Things like short hills to near maximum speed, but we're not talking about running them till you absolutely drop. We're talking about, whether it's 10 seconds, 20 seconds with a nice long recovery. So it could be 90 seconds, 2 minutes. And again, you're not looking to stay the whole afternoon on a hill. It might be 6 to 8 repetitions of those. And that power element then means that you start then to develop this running economy in terms of you're stronger then for your mechanics. And then the other element that I've put on there as well, zone 5, they're the repetitions where you can't talk. They're the elements of training. They're the ones that myself as a miler, we did a lot of that work. But that's because a lot of our training or elements to our training was anaerobic. 1500 meters we know is going towards the anaerobic profile, so you need it. But where it fits within our marathon runner, our 10K runners are having those engines of a marathon runner, but also tapping into some of the middle distance element as well. So having those shorter sessions at key times, but not to kill the system. Need to make sure that it's not overloading any of those, but they complement what you do. So so start thinking where you can about changing the mindset of some runners, where actually it's okay to run fast sometimes. It's okay to run really short, fast hills. And if you put it in the right place in your training, then it really becomes something where athletes find that it complements what they do. And again, I'll talk a little bit more detail about how we kind of fit those in and where they might fit in training. But what I'm trying to show you is it's an ingredients across the board. Pretty much where we fit, depends on the time of year to what the real amount of ingredients that goes into that. So there's a little plug for Dan Nash. Go on there if you want a little bit more about the physiological side of endurance running. 2 sessions on there. goes into a lot more detail about those zones and also about things like recovery, stress. You adapt to overload. So obviously volume, you're going to want to get better, but you do that through recovery. And therefore the second presentation really important with regards to recovery as well. So what we're going to now talk about is kind of examples and training blocks. But what I've done now, I put a slide up. Everyone that knows me knows that I love analogies. Now, reason for this analogy is it's someone stood in a stream or a shallow river, but it kind of gives us a reminder that if I put up just what I think is a guaranteed training program, or you read this is the steps to a training program, that you must do these bits at this exact time. Even the athletes you coach, for me, are never in the exact same place at the exact same time. So if you take the start of a winter block in September, even though it's the same athlete stood in the same place, everything around them is slightly different. So that could be where they are in terms of their fitness. That could be where they are in terms of their the season they've just had, even the mental components of whether they've moved forward. So it's even where they're going in terms of the racing and training that they're going to. So even though we might think people are in the same place, and therefore when we look at training plans, we look at training programs, it's never just apply this to someone else and it will work, because everything around them is slightly different. Now, there's going to be similarities. You're going to have athletes that are similar abilities, and you're always going to be looking to group people if you have large groups like I do. But ultimately, that's why I'm not a great fan of putting up a training plan that this is what to follow, because as I said, it's my experience with some of the athletes I've coached, it might not exactly fit. So just think that when you start a training cycle, that every time you start a training cycle, the components around are always slightly different. So don't just do the same thing. I actually did that a number of times when I coached myself back in the day, and it didn't work. I didn't get the same results. Whereas if I'd have mixed it up a bit more, probably gone a bit more aerobic, I think I probably would have had a slightly better career. So you live and you learn. So things you're considering, if you're an athlete or you're a coach, you're thinking about age. Now, when we talk about 10K, this is fairly significant now, because there's a lot of road races out there. There's a lot of temptation with nice fancy shoes to go and run longer distances at younger ages. Now, under 20s will run 10Ks, but what you don't want them to do is become kind of too burnt out over longer distances. I think when you get to under 23s, depending on the athletes, and we've had a number come through our group that are more than capable of running 10K on the road, on the track, and beyond that, they've got to run that distance across country anyway. But we start thinking about other factors that you're going to consider. So training age, obviously if you're part of the university program like I am, you're going to have athletes coming in at different times. Some have been training for 1 year, some have been training for 10 years. Use Inga Britsons as an example. Jakob, the teenage sensation, has been training aerobically since he was 5, cross-country skiing in the garage, or a multi-story garage. So his training age is 13, whereas other 18-year-olds that he's competing against, their training age is never near 13. It's probably more like 3 or even less like that. So biological age, so obviously, how old the body is, you're going to get more developed runners, especially in the under 23, especially those that are going into different age groups. But predominantly, when you get to senior level, most are kind of catching up with each other. And then obviously injury history. Your job as a coach is to keep people healthy, and you want athletes to think about keeping themselves healthy. So where have they been? What have they done? And obviously previous results. If people come to you and they want to run 8 minutes faster for 10K, that may be or may not be possible, but obviously previous results are going to dictate to a degree other results. But also, as a coach, you're looking at what they've done above, race distance wise, and also what they've done below. And I'll use the curious case of Jake Smith to describe what I mean by that very shortly. And then obviously you're going to talk to them about long, short-term goals and obviously what their aims are. They're the kind of fundamentals that you're going to think about with any kind of training program, and especially with the 10-kilometer distance. This guy here, CANOVA, an Italian eccentric, but an amazing coach. Now, if you get a chance to read his training programs, amazing information. Now, periodization, again, can be a bit of a scary word. It can start, people can think that it's overcomplicating things. but you're literally thinking about the period of training that you're in relative to where you're going. And the funnel periodization model that CANOVA uses, I think, is a really nice way of showing what training looks like, but also the fact that components of training are there pretty much throughout the cycles. Obviously back in the day, the linear profile, that it was big mileage followed by short hills, followed by time trials, followed by racing. That still has its place. And that's the thing with the beauty with coaching and training. There is not one size fits all, but I think a lot of coaches and a lot of training kind of plans are kind of, if you look at CANOVA's work, kind of fits this, where kind of general speed, you can see it's pretty much throughout, and it's higher in the base period. But ultimately, you're going towards working at that specific goal that you have, and for us, that's 10K. And you can see there the kind of volume curve that it goes up in that kind of from base to pre-comp, and obviously as you get towards your specific race, that it comes down. But these periodization models and any of these kind of charts or these training plans, and I was reading Daniels this morning as well, great book, Jack Daniels, but he has a 24 week plan into ultimate 10K. I think it's between 5K and 15K. Now for me, reality of things, who has 24 weeks of a planning cycle? Obviously, as coaches, we're playing with it the whole time, but as I'll show you in a slide in a minute, the reality of things is there's races at certain times. There's university races if they're university ages, they're age group races if they're age group. Some are doing indoors, some are doing track, some are doing road, and everything in between as well. So as coaches, we're doing our very best to kind of model things, but it's not a linear curve. It's not the simplest of tasks. And that's where the art of coaching comes in. You've got the science behind it, but the art of coaching is the tweaking of things, how long athletes stay at certain phases before moving them on. And that's why, again, that analogy of being stood in a stream, you're never in the same place twice. Therefore, that's why as a coach or as an athlete, you're constantly thinking about what can you change, what is changing around you, and therefore almost second guess what's coming next. So when we look at kind of training blocks, just really simplifying it. And again, on my run today, I was thinking about this in more depth as well. It's, you've probably, for most people, after a break, there's probably a pre-base phase where, you are starting that easy running, and you are maybe for, maybe 2 to 4 weeks of easy running. Now, I would have thought that most people kind of follow that. I know people, or some club structures or some group structures that go straight into, some harder interval work. But I think that, we probably would agree that an easier couple of weeks, maybe with a little bit of introduction of steady running, is probably the best way of kind of easing back in. But again, it's taking off where the athlete is. They're off maybe the back of a break, and therefore they're easing back in. Now, that base phase that we look at CANOVA again, you've got that rise in the amount of volume, and obviously going down from kind of general speed, general endurance into more specific work. And I think there you can look at those energy systems, and a lot of that kind of base work is that easy running, but it is that easy running being complemented with the tempo work that we kind of talked about as being golden. But more importantly, or not more importantly, but as importantly, introducing those power elements to it, short hills. Now, this is something that I picked up a lot reading. If you look at CANOVA's work, a lot of the Kenyans and the Africans that he looks after do these faster hills. Paula Radcliffe used to do strides after a long run in the evening. Chris Jones, great believer in short hills in that period as well. And again, it really complements. So you're thinking about running economy. Ultimately, you want to go through the cycle and be more efficient and have a better running economy to improve your threshold. Then it kind of makes sense to improve your power, especially when you're not at your maximum mileage, you're building up, therefore you're a little less fatigued. You maybe obviously have a little bit more time in your training week to actually fit in that quality work, where those short hills, and that kind of power also works as a kind of S&C. It's specific work that can obviously interact with your kind of mechanics and the way that you run as well. So really, really important. So, but again, I've literally just put down some notes there. Don't take these as written, just take them as ideas. But those kind of blocks that you sit within, before kind of moving on. And again, it's in ideal worlds of time frames, but we know athletes get injured. We know things don't go linear curves of training, just gets better and better and better. It's how you're going to adapt that around that. So you've got your pre-base where you're building up. You've got the base where you're starting to put more of the components in there and adding those short hills. And then pre-comp, you've got all the zones in there at some point. There's some element of all the zones in there. But obviously you've got that importance of zone 5, specific work. You built the big base with those 1, those 2s and the 3s. You've got that big aerobic base. Now obviously you can be a bit more civic, and we will talk about some of the civic sessions that you can do for 10K. But obviously we know, again, going back to Mr. Canova's work, you start to come off the absolute amount of volume that you're doing, and obviously you can then freshen up a bit. We know when you're doing a little bit more kind of quicker work, so race pace or under race pace work, that if you're obviously coming off volume, then hopefully you're going to be a little bit faster. You're going to be a little bit kind of fresher into those workouts. And then competition phases, how long do they last for? You know, we've had athletes that previously have qualified for championships in April, and the championships has been in August. We had Jake qualify this year in June, and the championships in July. So how long are you going to keep that competition phase for? It's, I said 1 to 6 weeks. That's really stretching it. If you're going to be peaking, then it's less than that. You know, it might even be you're trying to peak. If you're training or coaching someone for the Olympic Games, you have that one single date, and that's all it is every 4 years or 5 years if you're in a pandemic. But you know, you're thinking about those absolute days. For us, for other coaches where you've got athletes that maybe are racing every few weeks, then there's obviously a little bit more or give or take. But when are they really going to run fast is probably what you're going to ask them. And maybe when you ask them, you know, do they need those 7, 8, 10Ks by the time that they hit March? Obviously, if there's no pandemic, from January to March, you can fit in lots of 10Ks. But if you're trying to run really fast, where are the phases of training? Where are you peaking in your mileage? Where are you putting your volume in? And where are you getting a little bit more specific into those training, into those races? So where does it all fit? That's a great question, and the younger audience will get this. Instagram versus reality. You know, obviously Instagram is our model, is our Jack Daniels, 24 weeks or 26 weeks, perfect. But half a year, the reality, obviously, that we know that there's everything in between. There's races, there's weddings, there's you know, injuries, niggles. So you've got to adapt around it. It's not just as simple as a curve into training. You as a coach have to earn your money, even though there's no money in it, but you have to learn how to adapt around the athletes and adapt around the races that you have there. So a case study, I said the curious case of Jake Smith. So give a little bit of context now to the athlete or an athlete that I looked after, just to show you some of the things that we've had, you know, great benefits from. So in 2017, Jake came to Cardiff Met, age 19, as a 15:24, 32:11 guy. But interestingly, 70 minutes half marathon, and he did that a few days before coming to Cardiff Met. And the first time we met him, this lad turns up with bowed legs, looking like he's 12, and we were doing this session on Heath Park, and it was long tempo blocks, 5-minute tempo blocks on grass, and the crew were there from Tom Marshall, Ian Thomas, Jake Hayward, an amazingly strong group, and this lad was hanging tough with them. And I mean hanging tough because he looked spent after the first rep, but he held on to them for the whole session. They kept looking back, and I looked at this and I was like, that's that Jake Smith lad. There's something about him. And straight away, you know, when you know someone's run a 70-minute half marathon when they're 19, they've got obviously an aerobic capacity there. But one thing I saw straight away was toughness. Now, we talk about in this presentation about the mental side of running 10K. Now, to run a 10K really well, and obviously, you know, to then go above that and run half marathons and marathons really well, you've got to be tough. So having those components for Jake Smith off the bat, that was pretty exciting. But when I got talking to him, when we started to look at him run in the next few weeks, one of his weaknesses was his kind of strength, his power. To turn his legs over, he had no real kind of basic speed. But there was something that, you know, was a really easy kind of win. So the cycle that we went into had these short hills, and often have these conversations with athletes, and they turn up and they think it's going to be a big, massive session. And we have these conversations that actually this isn't a really big session. It's short hills followed by a steady run, so a 4 or 5 mile run. But when you get athletes that they're used to doing long reps, they're used to doing long runs, and you ask them to run for 10 seconds fast. For some, it blows their mind. But if you can obviously get them past that and obviously get them into a nice routine of it, then you get really big results. And taking that onto the track as well, Jake did some indoor racing, some indoor training, and you really saw a real improvement. And then the other great thing is using cross country. Now, cross country for 10K runners is great. You're running the volume, but it's a different surface, a different stressor. You're getting that volume in without the impact, or so much of the impact on the legs. Great for core stability. It's a real component. So putting that aerobic work in over cross country, over grass sessions, running cross country races. But what we found, complementing the volume with Jake that he could cope with and he was absolutely happy to do, but by giving him an understanding that the short hills and the faster workouts, and actually in the first summer, he actually did some 1500 meter workouts like fast 1200s, fast 800s, fast 400s, and you started to see the light switch flicker on and off with him, and his times came down rapidly over the shorter distances. But more importantly, his times came down massively in the longer distances. And the other real turning point in that first year with Jake was his realization that he had to smash every run and every session and every week as hard as the next. And actually at the end of the summer, when he was a bit toast at the end of the summer, he took a break. I think it was about 10 days off. And then after 10 days, he asked to run a 5K park run, as they always do. And I think it was within a week of coming back. And he ran a massive lifetime best. He ran 14:20 something. And the light switch went on and hasn't gone off since. That recovery and putting the work in is great. But if you don't recover and you don't take the time to absorb the work, then you're not going to get the benefits of it. And actually, if you do the hard work and you get the recovery right, then you get the adaptation and you get the fast times. And since then, he's been as good as gold, and he requests extra recovery, takes extra recovery. By 2008, gone, I think it was 29, that 24:23, 29:30, and then something again that we saw massively with him was this ability to go into the longer distances, to run faster over longer distances from that 10K engine. And he ran 64 flat at the Cardiff Half Marathon. And then hidden in there, or just slightly later than that, ran 8:06 for 3,000 meters in that December. So a 64 half marathon in October, an 8:06 in December, and you can see that's a 51-second increase or decrease, sorry, in his 3K personal best. And that was down to the quicker work. But my belief is, if he hadn't have done that quicker work and improved that ability to run faster, the ability came out after, or it showed after how much he'd moved on. But the work had been put in there to get that profile moving. His ability to run faster at the lactate turn points has shifted up, but more importantly, he had a bigger aerobic base to utilize that. Half marathon kicked off into the summer, 14 flat, 29:01, 8th at European Championships, and then in September broke the British half marathon record, Callum Hawkins's British half marathon record for under 23s by over a minute, ran 62:01, and then repeat short hills, cross country, indoor season. And then in March ran 62 flat in horrendously windy conditions at the big half, where he was in about 60-50 shape. And just to give you a context of the mileage, again, I know those would have looked at Callum's marathon mileage, but 130, we're a long way off that at the moment. Jake actually hit one of his record mile weeks last week, 106, 85 miles leading into that British half marathon record. And times now, as I said, I think he could run 30:30, 28 flat, maybe 60:50, give or take. But more importantly, his ability to run faster, shorter has improved massively. So any athletes out there that you need to sell the reason for being a bit more powerful, and you want to get people out there to be a bit more economical, then touching base with track, then that's really important. And obviously the old, what's the reality of what it looks like? Those that are kind of Welsh-based will look at that and go, I recognise that. September, you've got 10Ks, Cardiff, Swansea. You obviously got off the back of a summer. People can run really well at that period of time, because if you've come off the back of a track season, often people run very, very fast half marathons at the Great North Run because they've had that track speed. That leg speed has been turning over. They've gone back into a bit of pre-base, and therefore they can hit some very effective 10Ks. And then it's prep for cross country. And then you've got the next kind of phase where November 10K runners, you're looking at and licking your lips at the likes of Leeds, Abbey Dash, Telford. Within that, you've got intro for us into short hills, grass-based sessions, again, thinking about cross country. And then, March time's another great time for hitting some good 10Ks as well. After a cross country season, mix maybe of indoors. And again, that scares some people, but can they get indoors? Can they do some quicker 15 miling type work, 3K type work? And then for us, we start looking at the early 10K opportunities for university athletes. It's Bucks, then it's Highgate potentially. Off the summer, then starting to be track specific in kind of track work. And then obviously then moving on, you've got championships, whether they be in July, whether they're in August. But then you're sharpening, you're in CANOVA specific work. You're looking at some work where, we'll touch upon it in a second, where you're changing pace, but you're topping up. And hopefully you stand on that start line, that 10K, and you're in probably 1500 meter 5K shape to run personal best. Mo Farah broke the British record when he was in 10K shape, ran 3:28 off, 10K work, which shows you that aerobic capacity is so important. But a great believer in short hills. If you look at Mo's program, short hills are in there throughout the year, that power development. Therefore, it's something really important. And you're always trying to top up the base. So what does that look like? A quick snapshot. As I said, I'm not going to kind of get into too much depth of this because this is just one athlete, but it kind of gives you an idea of just some of the mileage. I'll send this to anyone that wants a quick snapshot of it. But you can see the kind of mileage on the left of each of the columns. 2 sessions a week, majority, and then the importance of long running there. The LR operates as the long run, and you can see some of the more specific work that comes in pre-race. And just interesting, actually, looking at the third column where he ran the qualifying time for the European Championships in horrendous conditions, gale force conditions in Holland. But the week before, 4 times 4 minutes, went horrendously, didn't finish the session. And it's always a good indicator that you don't need to smash every session and get every session right. So then the next week, and actually, sorry, the top column is wrong. It should be 29:15. That was the time he ran. It's actually correct in the bottom column there. The gold shows the highest week there. As you can see, some of them are a couple of weeks out. Some of them for championships, you're getting a little bit further out. That's because our aim was the European Championship. So again, taking CANOVA's kind of viewpoint that you're starting to come off the mileage. Now, obviously, where it fits early doors, the one on the left is one of the early season races. You've got the British universities, then you've got qualifying, you've got European champs. And then just to show you how the cycle looks, when he won the Cardiff 10K in the September of this year. But that was starting a base for his British half marathon record that was a few months later. So just a mix of systems in there. You can see there's different energy systems, there's different paces, there's relays in there for clubs, there's fartleks in there, there's long reps, there's short reps. You need variety in your training. There's 8-mile tempos, there's 10-mile tempos. So it just gives you a snapshot. There's 17-mile runs in there, 19-mile runs. So yeah, so you've got a component of training in there, but you've got an ingredient. It's not one thing that's going to make the difference. It's that ingredients and it's that variety, and it's keeping that athlete healthy as well. So last things, just to kind of flick through, heart rate zones. You can start to see there when we talk about Dan's heart rate zones. Look at that 97% in the training zones, training speeds and heart rate zones. You can see that's where it fits. That's a snapshot of Jake's training peaks, where you can see a majority of the paces and heart rates are in those zones. And as you can see how it filters off behind in terms of the heart rates and the paces as well. And they're just a snapshot, longest run of the week in duration. And again, this is a good snapshot for showing that it's not about holding the same every single week. You're going to have a stepped approach at certain times, and then you're going to be coming off. You're going to have easier weeks, you have race weeks. You're going to be building up and then staying the same or coming off again. As I said, if you look at a profile of a long run for someone and it's continuously a flat bed and it plateaus, I'm pretty sure at some point their performance is going to plateau. You're going to need to change varieties. You can see Not a massive change in increase, and actually that ends in the September. That's actually January to September. So just to show you that kind of links with the slide before, but actually there's another jump then to the amount in terms of the overall average in comparison. But it's a nice kind of indicator that by taking a step back, what you're trying to do as a coach is actually what you ended up seeing on the screen. So my training ingredients, so obviously the importance of volume, but safely increasing. Yeah, maintaining week by week, it's not easy. You know, you're making sure that if you're going 2 or 3 weeks increase at high volume, then you're coming off. Rest is so important. You're going to get the benefit from recovery, from making sure it's not a linear curve up. You can keep going. We have a rest day every 2 weeks to make sure that we use that, and also using effective use of S&C so athletes are strong enough to cope with the demands. Early phase of training, you can fit in 3 sessions, but they're not 3 hard sessions. So those short hills, those power hills we run after, the guys don't even look at them as hills now. Our majority of our bigger sessions, our volume sessions, are on a Tuesday. We actually use the outside of a track, the outside lane, so we can control the environment, but we're not so worried about lap splits, but we kind of run to feel. And when you come to running on the road, running to feel is really, really important with that. And predominantly now we've gone to, you know, for a lot of trainings, those 2 days a week that are volume based. So Tuesday sessions, Friday sessions, you can increase the volume, but it doesn't take away from the long run. If your long run is important as 10K runners, which it is, moving away from the 3 sessions where you battered yourself on a Saturday with a session, because the quality of a long run, if you're getting up to those 2-hour long runs, there it's really, really important. Obviously making sure that tempo component is in there within that 7 to 10 day window, so you're keeping on top of the tempo work and keeping the right amount of variety in there, but remembering where you are in that cycle. Are you building? Are you becoming more specific? Are you in comp phase? And then obviously keeping it a balanced structure. At some point you're going slower but longer. At some point you want to be going faster but shorter. But the last part we're going to talk about now is goal pace work. If you're going to run at goal pace, that last part of your training where you're looking at being specific, elements of this are going to be in there throughout that kind of civic comp phase where you're running at race pace. Your athletes have obviously built up a big enough base to cope with these sessions. And again, these are snapshots. These are examples of the types of training that you might use or sessions you might use. You mainly do one of these sessions every 10 days because they are that demanding. They are race kind of simulations, and you're getting used to the pace of the race. You can see there's 400-meter reps up to kind of 2-mile reps where you're running at race pace, so you're getting metronomic at that. If you're a road runner, you're probably doing predominantly these on the road or similar to that. And if you're a track runner, then getting used to running on the track. And therefore, our sessions that we do on a Tuesday are a nice kind of lead into that, where they're on a track, but they're not really thinking about or overly focused on the fact they are on a track. And therefore, these are ones that you can play with, but you really get a feel for them. And you as a coach, find the one that works for your athlete in terms of their confidence, 2 weeks or 8 days out or within that window, one of these sessions that they do. But as I said, we had Jake Smith had a horrendous 4 times 4-minute session. It should have been a 7 times 4-minute session. But when athletes are on the ball, they know that it's not an absolute given. And the other thing is, if you do a great session, it doesn't always mean it's going to absolutely translate into an amazing race. I wish it did. So championship race prep, last part of the presentation. So 2 miles times 2, and then minute on, minute off, or 10 times 400 meters at 3K pace. Change of pace. For those looking at getting and used to running at championships, tends to be a fluctuation in pace, especially when you get to the latter stages. Adam Bitchell chucked in one of his favorite ones of this. So 5 to 6 sets of 400 meters K, 400 meters. You're running the Ks at your kind of 10K pace, but you're picking up the 400s. So around about 5K pace, a really nice way of playing with the energy systems, going up and down the gears. So lastly, dissecting the perfect race. As a coach, you want confidence, knowing that they feel that, that they know the speed that they need to run above, below, and at. And therefore, they've got the tools to be able to run at those paces. Pre-race sessions, find one that works. We just said that. And obviously, different road splits over a kilometre, 400-meter splits. Do they know and have they got a goal plan there? Is it a means to an end? if you're racing like we had in March or September, they're only races to an end. The real championship races were later on in that summer. Therefore, where are you going in terms of planning? But I thought it was fun to ask the athletes what they thought about during a 10K. So I had a quick chat with the likes of the Jake Smith first. So obviously, you know, just getting out there and just thinking about, you know, just run and thinking about enjoying it. Running on the track sometimes, obviously, you know, it can be metronomic, but it can also be tough with a lap. So he prefers sometimes running on the road because he can just run, finding a rhythm. You've got Adam Bitchell, background of 1500 meter running, so that early part of the race, but more variables in track 10K, in road 10K with the weather. I think we've all had that from time to time. Charlotte Arter, interesting, prefers road over running on the track, but a nice little bit of advice to running on the track that Brendan Foster used to say the same, that didn't used to look at the lap marker until he knew it was in single digits, because if you look at it and there's 24 laps to go, then that could be pretty demoralizing. Kieran Lewis, so athletes that start to break it down into those set segments, so but the need to be super prepared. And then Ian Thomas, I like this, empty the tank. There's a sub 4 minute miler talking there at the end. So switching on, staying focused, and therefore having athletes that think about breaking down that race plan, whether it's on the track, whether it's on the road, and thinking about executing that race. So some prefer track, some prefer road, but getting people onto the track sometimes is really important. There's some great opportunities out there. Welsh Athletics run some good events. You obviously got Night at the 10Ks with Ben and his team. So way worth getting involved with those. Obviously, road races, so many more of them when we get back out of lockdown. And obviously splits, getting people used to running those splits, and obviously breaking down the distance, reinforcing self-talk, as those athletes just showed us in those slides before. And obviously make sure they know what it feels like. So hopefully that gave you an insight. Get some ingredients. What's your ingredients in your training? I said I was going to ask you some questions in terms of your training as coaches, what ingredients you have going in there, longer pace sessions, shorter tempo, using hills, using track, importance of rest days, and obviously longer track sessions, using the outside lane, but learn the feel of the run. So I think I've talked more than enough there, Liz. I think we've got some questions in. I'm going to pull up, I think Liz has sent over some questions. So let's get the first question going from. So got Andrew Fairclough Edwards. So have I made any changes during the current pandemic to training? It's a really good question, Andrew. Now, one of the big things is thinking about, you know, virtual racing. Now, for some virtual races, it's really important. Now, for some, it's been something that's helped them focus. Obviously, we don't know that we're going to have any races. You know, we've just seen the Cardiff Half Marathon cancelled. So at some point, if your athletes haven't been engaged with virtual racing, they might need to think about some virtual racing. And we've actually got, I think it's on the 4th of July, is the Welsh Athletics Virtual 10K, which is going to be launched off the back of this presentation. So it could be an opportunity. But I think for the athletes I've looked after, Andrew, I've been really impressed with how focused they've been. And I think that, you know, how they've really thought about what they're doing. And actually, by giving them some structure, it's really helped them. Others have really gone off and focused and done some different sessions that they haven't done before and taken more ownership over their running, which to me is amazing. Because again, it shows they're thinking about what they're doing. As a coach, you don't want athletes that don't think about the reasons and rationals behind why they train. You as a coach should be giving them to them in the majority of what you do, but you want them to go away and figure out and feel the running that they do. So that's been really good for them in training. So another question, Chris has asked, what's a good performance indicator used for 10K? I think using that 4-minute reps that we do on the track when it doesn't go wrong is a great indicator. So you should be able to run those 4-minute reps off 90 seconds at 10K pace. And that's a really good indicator. We've used that into 10K races, and it's been absolutely spot on unless it goes badly. And then you obviously go back to the other great work that's got in there. But yeah, I think it's making sure that you don't hang too much on them being absolute guarantors of performance. I think that they're really good guides, but as long as the whole kind of spectrum's going in there. Questions asked: do you race 10k differently on the road, sorry, the track to the road? I think our athletes answered that fantastically well. Obviously, there's a difference in the splits, and obviously the surface, and obviously the feedback that they're going to be getting every lap on the track to 10k on the road. And obviously, if you're on a road, the course is dependent on wind, it's dependent on whether it's a loop, it's dependent on whether you're tucked into a pack. So there's lots of different factors in there. But I think that, yeah, I think getting that understanding, your training obviously should replicate what you're doing in a race. So if you are going to be a 10k road runner, you're doing road type based sessions. If you are going to be a good and a very good track 10k runner, you have to spend time on the track. As we said with a 4-minute session, it doesn't always have to be to distance, can run to time, and it's a nice way of getting runners to think about blocks of time as opposed to just this is a lap after lap. But you saw some of those other key sessions, whether it's the 25 or 24 times 400 meters. I think Charlotte Arter said that was one of her favorite sessions as an indicator off 30 seconds. It's a good way, obviously, of using as a yardstick. Proof is doing it in a similar time, getting that great result, and you know then that that's what it translates to, and then using things as subsequent kind of yardsticks and guides into races. But knowing that if it doesn't go well, then that doesn't mean all your good work is gone. So, Aaron, what's your advice on 10k fueling, race plan? Well, obviously, you've got some key sessions going into there prior to that. Often thinking about what time of the day you're racing at. Now, obviously, road races tend to go off in the morning. Therefore, it's making sure that if you're road racing, that you're doing sessions in the morning at a similar time. Therefore, you're getting used to same hydration, whether it's electrolytes, whether it's carbohydrate going in there, and whether what you're actually eating for breakfast. If you're obviously used to, or there's 10k races which tend to be at night on the track, then again your sessions are replicating those. So again, you're getting used to the same kind of protocol in terms of what you eat. Race day is not the day to be trying new things. You want a tried and tested system in place. I think that's a really good way of doing it, taking some key sessions, and therefore when you go in, you're doing pretty much the same thing into race day. Lorna, any tips on getting athletes to run slower in training? Well, I kind of showed you the heart rates and those golden zones in the heart rates. Now, if you can get some good measurements on heart rates, it's a good way. And the guys that I look after, those that use heart rates, they're very, very smart on them. And also, I showed you the training peaks that we use is a really good way of me kind of, without them really realizing, but they know I'm looking. We'll take a little snapshot of their morning run, and I know if they've run easy. I know if they've recovered from the night before because their heart rates are lower. The pace is, slower, or sometimes it's not that slow, but the heart rates are low, but they're recovering. Also, other times they turn around to me, or I'll turn around to them and say, "Your heart rate was high this morning, wasn't it?" And they'll be like, "Yeah." And it might be a case of not doing the session. So proof's in the pudding with athletes that if their key sessions aren't going to plan and they're running too fast in other times, then we always have, when our freshers come in to university, the Monday night runs that are a progression run, they know when they overcook it because Tuesday they're terrible. And after a couple of bad Tuesdays, they get the realization that, do you know what? I can't bash a Monday run and run a really good session on a Tuesday. So athletes get smart. So get them to think about heart rates, get them to think about being a bit smarter with their recovery. If you're trying to run in the same zone all the time, we know from adaptation, it's not going to be the best way of getting fit. Those zones 1 and 2, easy running, 70% and under, that's a golden area to be running some of your runs in. So get time on feet and just get that volume in. Francesco, what are your views on positive, negative splits? Really good question. I think in track running tends to be negative splits because it tends to wind up. Olympic Games will finish with 52, 53 second last 400 meters. Those last kilometers are in the 2:22, and therefore having that element of speed sometimes at the end of some of your training sessions in that real kind of pre-comp element can be really important. Again, Mo Farah, I think, chucking on 3-400s at the end of 6 times a mile, but running them in that last lap type pace. Road running, sometimes it tends to be even pace running, but again, nature of the course, some courses have a faster first section, and therefore it might be that you don't come home as fast, but the effort is the same. So that, I think,